Iran has launched strikes on U.S. installations in the Gulf region, saying it's in response to U.S. attacks overnight. Tehran released this footage showing missiles being launched towards U.S. targets in the region. The strikes come after U.S. attacks around the Strait of Hormuz. Washington says that it was in retaliation to the downing of a helicopter. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas condemned the attacks as a violation of its sovereignty and reiterated Iran's right to respond in self-defense. Iran's Revolutionary Guard says it targeted Al-Azraq base in Jordan and Ali Al-Salem base in Kuwait. Jordan's armed forces say it shot down 5 missiles with no injuries or material damage reported. Explosions were also seen in Bahrain, where the Interior Ministry says warning sirens were sounded. The public was told to take shelter. Iran has warned of more severe responses if the U.S. continues its attacks. All of those strikes come after U.S. Central Command said it completed its operation in Iran. The U.S. carried out several hours of airstrikes on multiple locations in the early hours of Wednesday. It's the latest in a series of tit-for-tat violence, and it comes as the Trump administration continues to say that both sides are moving closer to a more permanent deal. In a statement, CENTCOM said that its forces struck Iranian air defense, ground control stations, and surveillance radar sites near the Strait of Hormuz with precision munitions from U.S. Air Force and Navy fighter jets. The operation was a proportional response to recent attacks on U.S. forces and international commercial ships transiting regional waters. U.S. forces remain vigilant and postured to defend against unjustified Iranian aggression. Here's a look at where some of those U.S. attacks were reported. Explosions were heard in the Araghchi port area, where the southern coast of Iran meets the Strait of Hormuz. Air defense activity was also reported on Qeshm Island and in Bandar Abbas. We'll be speaking to our correspondent in Doha, Zain Basravi, in just a moment. But first, let's go to the Iranian capital and Tauhid Assadi. So, Tauhid, what is Iran saying about this new round of attacks and what was hit inside of Iran?
Well, actually, a new round of escalation following the American attacks on Iranian territories after the U.S. President Donald Trump talked about Iranians shooting down a Apache helicopter, and the Iranian deputy foreign minister came out on his interview with Al Jazeera to deny deliberate attack on that helicopter. But still, regardless of all these rhetoric going on, we know that right now we see a new round of escalation. And speaking of the exchange of fire, we know that IRGC has published several statements in that regard. First, they said that Jask, Sirik, and Qeshm have been targeted by the American forces, as a result of which a telecommunication tower in Sirik as well as 2 water tanks in Sirik have been impacted, have been targeted in addition to other military locations. In response, IRGC says that it has conducted drone attacks on U.S. assets, U.S. bases across the region, including in Bahrain and in Kuwait. Also, they're saying that the Navy forces have conducted this attack, while they're saying that the naval forces have conducted attacks targeting at least 21 U.S. assets across the region. In addition, we've got another statement from the aerospace forces of IRGC. They're talking about additional attacks on quote-unquote 4 important targets, including a F-35 fighter jet hangars at U.S. base and a command and control center in Jordan. All in all, what we hear from Iran is first condemning the American attacks, and then second, they're saying that if the American attacks continue, there are going to be more and more responses, crushing and regrettable ahead.
All right, that's Tauhid Assadi reporting live for us from Tehran. Thank you, Tauhid. Let's bring in Zain Basravi now, who joins us live from here in Doha. So, Zain, Tauhid mentioned it. Jordan was a location of some of these strikes from Iran. Bahrain and Kuwait were 2. But we have seen in the past, as Iran retaliates on some of these strikes, that Bahrain and Kuwait have been targeted before in the last couple of weeks or during this period of ceasefire. Jordan, however, has not been a target of Iranian strikes since much closer to the beginning of this conflict. How much concern will there be in the region because of the location of these strikes?
Well, it isn't just that Iran is expanding its scope of operations now in this latest ceasefire to include Jordan. It's also what they say they are targeting. The U.S. base they said they hit included a number of targets, including hangars for the F-35 attack aircraft. So they're specifying what they are going after, and that would reflect potentially an expansion that isn't just episodic, that could lead to a return to a more consistent dynamic conflict, and that's really the worry. It is at least the third time that we've seen in the last week Kuwait and Bahrain be specifically targeted. U.S. forces in Kuwait, they say they're targeting the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. But what we are seeing is a number of flare-ups since this latest ceasefire was announced. Since earlier, when the first ceasefire announced, just before that, Kuwait came under heavy bombardment, and it was just a week ago today that we saw attacks on Kuwait that resulted not just in U.S. targets being hit, but the Kuwait International Airport being severely struck, the international terminal undergoing severe damage. What we are hearing today is that once again the Fifth Fleet was targeted by drones. We also know that Kuwait sounded air alarms and was carrying out air defense interceptions of what it described as Iranian projectiles. And in Jordan, the Iranians saying that they struck targets there, but Jordan's armed forces saying that air defense interceptions resulted in debris falling. Yes, and they did deal with damage from that, but there were no casualties or material damage of any kind. Now, something that the Iranians said in a statement that the IRGC put out that will be of incredible importance to residents of the GCC, of the Gulf Arab neighboring states around Iran, of the people living here, of the leadership as well, is something I'll read to you here. They strongly condemn U.S. crimes, but issued a warning to countries located on the southern shores of the Gulf. They have a legal and moral responsibility to prevent their territory being used by the U.S. and for the defense of Israel by the U.S. and planning by the Zionist regime, as they call it. They also said they will not hesitate to exercise their inherent right of self-defense, including targeting the sources of attacks, as well as bases and logistical facilities used to carry out and support aggressive operations against Iran. So this is a clear sign that rhetoric is returning to what it was in the early days of the war, when part of Iran's retaliation for coming under strikes by the U.S. and Israel was to retaliate against Arab neighbors in the region.
Okay, that's Al Jazeera's Zain Basravi reporting live for us from here in Doha. Zain, thank you.